Hey, no shitters. Great podcast coming up here for you with Judy, Carey, Nevin, who's a children's author, and we talk about the implications of the Me Too movement in children's literature today. Fascinating conversation. Make sure you stick around for that. That's coming up. Lauren Curtis, previous guest on the podcast, is an artist and just a really fascinating person. She's currently actually promoting some art classes and instruction and things like that. She'll even do it over Skype. She has a discounted rate for that. But we put that up on the No Shit page for anybody that's interested in reaching out to Lauren and doing some educate yourself on art and things like that. So if you get a chance, check that out. Like I said, the link's on the No Shit Facebook page, so you can go and reach out to her. As always, we want you to reach out and check out the xfactory.com. The xfactory.com is where we host the podcast from. It's our home. It's our ideological and spiritual home, I guess,
Nirvana,
in a lot of ways.
our Arcadia.
Yeah.
Our Elysium.
So please go over a lot of great stuff going on over at the xfactory.com for people. And if you're looking for hosting services or anything like that, if you're an artist and looking for people to collaborate with, reach out to Tangent. You won't be disappointed. But anyway, folks, great podcast coming up, and check it out right now. Hello out there, and welcome to the No Shit Cast, flagship podcast of the X Factory Creative Network. I'm your host, Matt Frazier. Got a really cool in-studio guest for you today, folks. Judy, Carey, Nevin is joining us in the studio to talk to us about being a published author and children's books and things like that. My co-host, as usual, the great wizard of historical knowledge himself, Mr. Eric D. Smith. How you doing, Eric?
Very good. Thank you, Matt.
So, Judy, thank you for joining us in the studio. How you doing today?
I'm fine, thanks.
Hello.
Hi. So I have a little disclaimer. Eric works for me in my library.
Oh, right. Yes.
And he's in one of my husband's classes because my husband is a professor.
And he's my advisor.
And he's his advisor. So we have there's a lot of
It's a
weird
very
connections today. Yeah. Eric is the center of our world, is what I'm trying to say.
I'm the problem child.
Yes. Well, you're the one that needs the most attention for sure. Right? That's what it is. So, glad you could join us here in the studio today. I've been really looking forward to this, and we'll get to that in a minute. But could you take some time, kind of explain to us what you do at the university, and talk to us a little bit about sort of your past and how you got into being a children's author and things like that?
Sure. So I am currently the director of the library at Ohio University in Lancaster, which is one of 5 branch campuses of the Ohio University Network. Being the director at a small library means that you're in charge of things like the budget and all those kinds of things, and hiring and advising the student employees, but I only have one full-time employee to supervise. So I do a lot of stuff that directors at big universities don't do. But I also don't have to do some of the things that the directors at the big universities do, which I'm happy about. So it's kind of a perfect mixture of getting to keep your hands in everything, but still have a little more responsibility. So I like it. I always swore up and down to anyone who would listen that I would never do management, ever, ever, ever. And hello, here I sit being the director. But I also famously told my mother that I was never going to be a librarian again after I worked at a high school for 3 years. So, I go back on what I say quite a bit, apparently.
Did you not like the high school library?
Oh, my God, it almost killed me. Killed me. So going way back when I was young, everyone who knew me said, oh, you should be a teacher. And I always liked helping people with things in class and whatever. And everyone swore I should be a teacher. And I never wanted to, ever. And I went through college thinking...
Just didn't like kids? Or?
No. Well, I could never envision
period.
the classroom management portion, even though when I was a kid I couldn't put the name to it. But I'm not good at discipline, which I'm sure Eric can tell you. I'm just not
a great boss. Huh?
Yeah, I'm a good boss. I'm pretty easygoing. And so I couldn't imagine being in a classroom like that. I mean, that wasn't my thing. I like to help people, and I'm interested in things, but I just couldn't be in front of a classroom of kids. It wasn't my thing. So I went to college with an accounting major, of all things. And my grandfather died when I was in high school, and I was his favorite. And he was an actuary. And I didn't fully know what it was, but I used actuary as that job that you do when you do a career report in middle school. And I found out a little bit about it. So I thought I was going to be an actuary because you have to be good at math, and it was one of my best subjects.
And what do they do?
They do the statistics for life insurance companies and things like that, where they figure out life expectancies.
All the
and,
mortality
they make all those
tables
tables.
yep.
Those are actuaries behind that. So it's important work, and it's very difficult statistics and math and all that. But I didn't know a lot about it. I was good at math, and I thought, okay, math, and it's a high-paying job comparatively with other math things. So I went to school for accounting because there isn't much in the realm of actuary degrees. There are some, but not at every school.
It's like a really specialized field kind of thing.
And you have to, so you either have to have a business degree or a math degree if you want to be move ahead into actuarial science. So I chose accounting and almost failed out of school. So while I was almost failing out, I changed my major to management because I could still graduate in 4 years. And I had experience working at Blockbuster Video in my town. And
wow, Blockbuster Video.
Yeah, long time ago.
Yeah,
they were a
right.
big deal. And I worked for a guy who had a franchise of like 17 in our area. So when I graduated from school, I was an assistant manager. But when I was in college, my roommate and I always collected children's books because we loved the stories too, but I was big on the art. And so I collected them, not in a way where I would go to book sales and say, aha, this one's a first edition. I just picked what I liked and I bought them. But we went to school, I went to SUNY Geneseo, which is a New York State school between Rochester and Buffalo in the Finger Lakes region. And it's in a community of 5,000 people. It's a National Historic City, town, village, whatever. I think it's probably village. And so it's beautiful, little, not a lot to do. And their little public library is the cutest thing you've ever seen, and it's all wood inside. And so my roommate and I used to go and grab piles of children's books and bring them home for study breaks. And so I had that background of loving them but not doing anything with them. And then one of my good friends was this is a really long-winded explanation of how I got there.
No, it's perfect.
Yeah.
But it's how I got there.
Right.
Took a long time. And so my friend at the time was an education major for like elementary school. She came with me to my hometown to visit my elementary school. And my childhood librarian was young when she was my librarian, so she was still working when I was an adult. And so we were chatting with her, and the librarian said to my friend, well, if you're not sure you want to be a teacher, a great option is being a librarian. And I was like, wait a minute.
Is there like a shortcut here? Or,
yeah, I never wanted to be a teacher. Everyone said I should be a teacher, but maybe a librarian. So I started looking into it, and so I was still working at Blockbuster Video as an assistant manager. And then during the day, I volunteered at my elementary school library for most of a school year to see if I liked it and if I wanted to bother going to library school, because it's a big investment to do if you don't think you want to do it. So
how long do you have to go to library school? Like,
every school has a different number of credit hours and everything, and it's changed. But for me, it was a year and a half.
And it's also
It's
based
usually
on that
between a
you
year and two.
that you have taken other classes and stuff too,
There's
right? It's
very
like a
few
branch
classes
off.
that feed into the library program that would transfer into it. So basically,
it's a commitment.
Yeah, you just do the year and a half or two. It's almost impossible to transfer something in because all the classes are library specific. Like, you take reference classes, you take cataloging classes, things like that. Those aren't things you would have taken somewhere else. So.
Yeah, and then we have taken a crash course in some of that. I know that I was at least one class that you gave on how to research papers and stuff, and basically taught me how to use, well, of course, when I started working for you,
Yes.
teaching me how to use the research, it's Alice, how
Yeah,
to
the
link
catalog
to,
and the databases.
to
Mhm.
find books and videos and PDFs and all sorts of things.
Yeah, and those aren't the things you take in class because those are specific to the resources you learn.
but vital.
Like more abstract things, yeah. So, so I thought I was going to be a children's librarian back then, and I wasn't going to be a school librarian because to be a school librarian in most states, you also have to have an education certificate or some kind of degree in education. So I didn't have that. So I would have had to get 2 masters, and there was no way I was going to do that. So I went with a specialization in children's and youth services, which means basically I was going to be a public librarian who did children's stuff. So story times and, collection development for the children and all that. And I took children's literature, history of children's literature, young adult literature, and in one of those courses, the professor brought in a speaker, George Nicholson, who had his own literary agency, and he spoke to our class and gave us this whole, it was awesome, this whole thing about the history of publishing, basically. And I didn't know that about publishing as an industry. Nobody talks about it outside of the New York, New Jersey area, because that's
Right.
where the bulk of it is. And so, and I went to Rutgers, so I was in that area. And it was fascinating. And afterwards I said, wow, I went up and talked to him and I said, I've always collected children's books. I'm kind of interested in this whole publishing thing. I don't know anything about it. And he said, well, it would be a good idea for you to do some kind of internship. Let me know. I'll give you a hand. So I didn't do an internship like a school internship where you get credit. I was the practically free intern, but I still had to get somebody to accept me. So he went through the members of the Children's Book Council and pointed to the places on the list where he thought I should write letters. And he had me come to his office. He was really helpful. And I wrote letters. And honestly, the only reason I got my internship was because of him. The person called me and said, so how do you know George? First off, there was nothing else. Wow. And it was Phyllis Fogelman, who is a huge mover and shaker in the publishing world. She has her own imprint now, but she was the head of Dial Books for young readers. So she gave me an internship working with one of her editors. I sat at a desk in the hallway by the fax machine. Got paid $8 a day.
Wow.
It was in 1995 or 6, I think, something like that. It cost me over $7, I think, to take the train in and out of the city.
So you didn't even have enough for lunch.
No.
Yeah, they weren't even covering lunch.
No.
Yeah.
So my job was to basically help Diane with Rico, who was the editor I supported, and she gave me lots of cool stuff to do, and I loved it right away, and it was my goal from that point to try to find a job in publishing. So luckily, Dial is part of a larger company that is Penguin Books.
I've heard of Penguin Books.
Yeah,
Yep.
from the adult side, they have all those ones with the little penguin logo, and they have tons of classics. They have a lot of really great. So Penguin is the umbrella name, and then within it there are places called imprints, and those imprints are the mini companies that exist within Penguin. So Viking is one, Dial is one, Putnam now is one because they merged. Dutton, they're the Winnie the Pooh people. Puffin are the paperback people. I can't even think of all of them, but they're all part of Penguin. So I was at Dial, but right down the hall was Viking, and right down the hall was another one, and downstairs was another one, and upstairs were the grown-up people. And it's hard because outside of publishing, we refer to it as adult books and children's books.
Right.
But well, exactly. When you're not talking to publishing people and you say adult books, then there's a different connotation there. So I say grown up when I'm talking to outside.
Very adult books.
Right. Yeah, that would be different. I don't think Penguin publishes any of those. So I started at Dial, and I just started searching for a full-time job as soon as I got there, practically. And because I was within that imprint, there were other openings happening. So Viking had an opening, and I applied, and I already kind of knew some of the Viking people because they were truly down the hall. And I would see them pass by my little tiny desk in the hall. So I got a job as an editorial assistant at Viking in February, and I graduated in December. And I had been an intern for months before that. So I started out assisting to, what were their executive editors.
Okay. So that was kind of your story, right? From how you got into the publishing business and things like that, okay? And how you became a librarian and that kind of stuff. Now, one of the hot topics I don't know if I should say it this way or not, but one of the interesting topics that I really wanted to talk to you about was some of the research that you've participated in here recently and have been doing on character types in children's stories. And I'm not even going to begin to explain that because I want you to, but I find this whole topic extremely fascinating. So really take your time and if you want and kind of elaborate on what this is.
So I think this happens to almost anyone who has a kid. When you have a kid, your life starts to, you have all these aha moments and you feel, at least I do, feel kind of stupid that I didn't notice before I had my kid. You know, so like we have a daughter. When she was an infant, my husband and I read to her from day one. And, you know, you read books that are like lullaby kinds of books and sweet little books and all this. Well, try and find a little sweet bedtime book that it features a dad, and it's near impossible. So my husband is sitting there like head over heels in love with our daughter, reading these books about mommies are the best, mommies love you, mommies take care of you, only kisses from mommy are the best, and, you know, all these things, and not one of them was one that, you know, Mark could read and see himself in. And so at the time, I was making connections with a former colleague from Viking who is now an agent, and she was saying, so you ready to write yet? Because she always thought I would write, and I was like, no, nope. And then started playing with it because I was home for 6 weeks with Sarah. Babies take naps. Started kind of looking into it, and then Mark was having this issue where he wasn't fine. He never said anything to me, but it, you know, you kind of feel that way. And then he said something one time. He was playing with Sarah, and she was still an infant, and he said, you know, daddies like hugs too. And I was like, yeah, wait a minute. So then I started kind of making a list of things daddies like from a baby's perspective. And so that became my first book. And so there's that piece where, like, I never ever thought about the dad representation in books. And if you really start looking at it, you notice that dads are either invisible. When the books are for babies, the daddies are almost never there. If the daddy is there for babies and slightly older, they're portrayed as the clown or the buffoon who shouldn't be left home alone with the baby. Don't do it, oh my God. The daddy might, you know, put the diaper on your head, you know, and all this. And then when they get older, the dads get in there, and then there's more stereotypical gender roles where the dad is the one who goes off to work and they say, bye daddy, see you when you get home, or the daddy comes home, what did you do all day, that kind of thing. And the daddy becomes present, but kind of stereotypically present.
Right.
And the mom is still the one who cares for the baby. And then, so that's kind of one thing I noticed when Sarah was born almost immediately. And then trying to read books to her that actually show girls in them became the next aha, because I've never really, when I was an editor, never once did I say, ooh, you know, that's a boy in there. Maybe we should change it to a girl. You know, I just, whatever the author wrote, you know, they wrote, and I didn't ever think about it. It's not like I thought about it and said, no, I better give them creative license. I didn't even think about it. And now I have this girl, and I'm changing the pronouns for almost every single book because there are no books that we can find that show girls. And if they are girls, they're with bows, wearing dresses, wearing pink, and they give them different roles. Like girls are like usually not the troublemakers. They're not the ones who are climbing trees. They're not the ones who are picking up bugs. And they're not the ones doing the hardcore play. They're doing different things.
Or my observation kind of to that has been that when a girl is portrayed that way, she's also portrayed as a rebel, as a troublemaker, a tomboy, all of this kind of stuff as different. Right. Yeah.
And so that is the thing that I think sticks in my craw the most is the lack of girl characters that are just normal in our world. If you think about it, we're 50-50 or close to 50-50 male, female. And in children's books, the split between male characters and female characters, I shouldn't say, is not anywhere near 50-50 when you do the analysis of, I don't remember what the number is, but it's not 50-50.
Well, yeah, you can swag this here. You can guess.
I can guess.
As long as we say, hey, I'm guessing and
I'm
probably
remember,
making this up.
because I did read, there are research articles, but there hasn't been one within the last 5 to 10 years. There was one that analyzed, it was mostly the Caldecott Award winners, which are the book. Caldecott Award is the one given for the best illustrations by the ALA and American Library Association. They have a subgroup for children's services. And they give an award and then honors every year. And so someone analyzed 200 Caldecott winners. But the Caldecott winners are not necessarily the ones most people read in their homes. Libraries buy Caldecott winners because they're the award winners and you want to have them. But people don't always go to the bookstore and say, hey, I want all the Caldecott awards. So there's kind of a different group when you only look at Caldecotts. And they acknowledge that. So I think one study they did Caldecotts and like the New York Times bestselling children's books or something, and they tried to combine it. But it's still, I don't even remember anymore, but it's like between 70 and 80% female or male to female when you look at animal characters. When you look at human, it's a little closer, like 60-40 or something. But then there's another study that's just inanimate objects, and that one's the amazing one. I mean, almost every inanimate object is male. And so we have, trying to think of some of the ones we have at home. We have like 250 books right now. I can attest. We take like,
and you guys gave away
we take like 40 books out of the library every time Sarah steps foot in our library. And then she has her own. Yeah, she takes, oh my God. She keeps our circulation statistics up. So there are books about trucks. One of the ones we have that actually does a good job is called Digger, Dozer, Truck Dumper, something like that. And it's poems about different construction vehicles. And some of them are actually given female pronouns, which is very uncommon, especially talking about trucks. There are never any girl trucks in truck books. Right. Sarah was obsessed with trucks, just like most little kids are, but because you go by a construction site on the way to school, look at that, there's a, whatever. And in the books, most of them are all male.
That's weird because a lot of people call machines she.
Yes, boats, cars, people refer to as she in their adult world, but in children's books, girls are invisible.
And I don't know why they call them lorries in the United Kingdom, but it is a female name, right? I mean,
but it's spelled different. It's
does
L-O-R-R-I-Y.
it mean something that I probably don't know?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
But when I hear that, I think, well, that's very feminine to my ears, at least.
Right.
So you think there would be some in there, but
no, inanimate objects are hard. Sometimes they're gender neutral, which is great, and that's the way, honestly, it would be better than trying to create parity with both genders.
Or an inanimate object.
I know, an inanimate object. It doesn't have a gender.
Right.
And you could call it it, and it would be okay.
Yeah.
But when they do have genders, the difference is remarkable. And I'm not what I want to do this summer, my personal project, if I can, is I want to go through our library. So because we're an academic library, we support all the different majors we have. And one of the majors we have is early childhood education. Okay. Which means that we buy children's books for those students to use with like student teaching or visits to schools or to create lesson plans or whatever. So we actually have, 6,000 to 10,000 children's books. So I want to go through like every 150th one and pull it out and mark down whether it's a female character or not. And what really interests me, which there isn't a lot of research on, is the connection between the gender of the author and the gender of the character.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
It's almost, every time I read one to Sarah and it's a boy, I kind of look quickly at the author's name. I'm like, that was a woman. And so I wonder about whether the author has a son, because that is a direct connection. Whatever kid you have, that's the story you create in your mind if you're a writer.
Sure.
If you're writing because you're inspired by something you saw your kid do. Yeah. Clearly, you're going to make it the gender of your kid.
Yep.
But I did a little survey through a Facebook group of mostly female publishing people. There were 105 responses. And one of the questions I asked was how many children you have at all, and then how many of those children match your gender, and then how many of your characters match the gender of your children. And it was actually pretty balanced, but the only people who took it were people who were part of this group who were women who were really interested in all things gender revolving around publishing in children's literature. So there's kind of a skew there because hopefully these women are a little more aware and thinking about it while they're doing their writing. Yeah. So I don't know what the mainstream world would look like, but there's so many characters where it's male, female author, and I keep thinking, why is it? But I have to call myself out, but being honest, if I see a critter outside and I'm talking with my child, I say, oh, look at that cute little chipmunk. I wonder where he's going.
Yep.
And default always goes to male, even for someone who's trying to think about it. So I actually am trying really, really hard to change it so that when I say that, I say, oh, look at her. Isn't she cute? Because I can't believe myself. And it bugs me that I do it. So I'm trying to change. And hopefully, because Sarah does it too. And I think she's in a class at her pre-K where it's almost all boys. When she was in the largest size class she had, there were 14 or 15 kids, and I think there were 3 girls. I mean, it's really heavy boy. So she's kind of confused with her pronouns because she'll call she, he, and she'll call, like pause, like, now what? She, he. And so I don't know if I'm muddying the waters by doing what, like if I start out saying, oh, look at that chipmunk, she's so cute. Like maybe I'm showing her that
There's
it
plenty
doesn't
of
really
other
matter.
things muddying those waters currently
It's kind of, it's true though, but it's cultural in a sense, because you're right. Things that, like Eric was saying, machines and things like that tend to always take on boats. Like this female sort of default. And there are other things that we just automatically assume with like the generic he.
Yeah, he is the default.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. There's no denying that. And
It's
for pretty much everything,
Yes.
and everything else is by exception.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
so, obviously, and people who listen to the show know my experiences in reading a lot of game books and stuff like that. The first ones I started reading were from the 70s, right? And they went to great lengths to, in every situation, he/she.
Right.
To the extent that when they went into the second edition, third, fourth, and fifth, and I think current, they have a preface at the beginning that says, look, we're not going to waste, no matter how verbose the author is or how deep the rule set is, we're not going to waste space writing he/she in every instance. And we want you to understand that we're going to use he in every instance, but we don't mean to imply that it's all people that are he that are playing this game, and we welcome women. I mean, like, there's this whole...
But they chose to default say, never
he,
mind, we're going to do
yes.
he, instead of
Exactly.
saying, you know what, we're not going to waste ink, but we're going to say she.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think the same thing when one of Sarah's books has multiple characters, I do every other. So if it's, for example, there's Mark's favorite book to read to her, The Gruffalo. And it's this cute little book. There's a mouse going through the forest, finds a nut, and we say she. I don't think she has a gender, actually. The one character in the whole book with no gender is the main character, who's the smart one. So she's she. And she finds the nut, and then a whole bunch of different forest animals one at a time come to her and say they're going to eat her. And she says, oh, well, I'd love to, because they try to trick her and say, you want to come to tea at my house? Oh, I'd love to, but I'm off to meet the Gruffalo. A Gruffalo? And, oh, you've never heard of a Gruffalo? And the mouse describes the Gruffalo, and it's got big orange eyes, spikes down its back, all these things, but the Gruffalo has a gender, and it's a he. So I change it to it. What kind of monster has it? A monster can be it. So the Gruffalo is it. But then every other animal she encounters, they're all male, the entire book. There is no female gender given in the whole book. So we give the mouse the smart one. Sorry, boys. The mouse is a girl. And then when I read it, I try to modify every other to be male, female. But in my brain, I'm thinking, if I did it all girl, what would the harm be in that? But, because she's reading all these other books where they're all male, but then there's a part of me that thinks, well, do I really want her to think everywhere is female? But there's no chance that will ever happen in her world, because everywhere else she goes, it will be all male. So what if I make everything all girl? But I still do every other, which, I'm fine with. But there is a piece of my brain that thinks, why am I doing that? But there is, I don't know.
Well, and having the issue of transgender also thickens the issue of what pronouns you're using or how you approach androgynous machines, and then giving them some sort of and it's likely that, I don't know, that you could even write a book that addresses the issue of transgender by having an androgynous machine that eventually acquires some sort of gender.
Yeah, well, there's a member of that group in Facebook who came in late to the group, and I kind of wish that this person goes by the they pronoun. I wish that they had come in early because the name of the group was Women of Kidlit. And this person came in and said, whoa, you're telling people who might be in a different category that they are not part of this discussion. And they came in too late to change the name of the thing because there were all these hashtags and all these things. And as soon as they posted, I thought, man, how,
It's insidious, isn't it? Because it's so you don't even think about it.
But no need to feel bad about it because no offense was ever
out. Right.
Yeah, no offense was ever
yeah.
intended. You're like, well, and that, assumably they understood that because they
yes,
ended up
and
being
she
a
maintained, and they maintained part of the group and suggested a new hashtag because once March was over, all of the essays. Well, I have to go back and tell you what this all is because I realized I didn't talk about it. But they suggested a new name once March ended, and it was either childlit equality or equality and childlit. And it was something that everyone got behind because there was a survey about which one we should use, and that was the one that everybody decided on.
Nomenclature. Name it scientifically.
Yeah. So I am all over the place. But so in March, there was...
Welcome to podcasting.
I know,
you can
my
tangent
God,
off to any
this
degree.
is, yeah, this is
perfect.
welcome to my brain.
Perfect.
All over. So the Me Too movement came out big and strong all over social media, regular media, everywhere. And then as a reaction to that, or just kind of an offshoot of it, there was a children's lit, I don't know if it was a blog post or an article in a published resource, but somewhere someone wrote an article about, hey, Me Too is also in children's literature.
And let me say real quick, because I don't know much about the Me Too movement. I kind of came in on late on that. I mean, I understand what it is now. But correct me if I'm wrong. This is where it became obvious that there's all of these people in the upper echelons of society that was abusing women. Is that same thing?
Well, it wasn't necessarily upper echelons. It's just that it was,
right.
it was that it was happening so often in so many places and people weren't seeing it. And so one big name was the Weinstein case.
Harvey Weinstein.
And that became kind of the big name and Bill Cosby. And so there were big names, but
it didn't enter into my world until it got into the gaming community and there was somebody that was accused.
There's tons in the gaming community.
Yeah, I had no idea. So that was kind of like, I was shocked. And I still can't believe. It's like hard. I mean, not that I don't believe, but it blows my mind to think that people in those positions would use their power for that base kind of a reason. Right. Like, I get that people might use power to a bad end or to gain more power or something like that, but to in that way, I don't know, man. It just seems like the world. I felt that the world's a lot worse than I thought it was. I was a bit naive.
I think that's kind of what the Me Too hashtag it was all about, is like, hey, you got to see these things that you've never seen before and that you've been maybe, either ignoring or just not aware of or whatever. And so then the children's book world blew up. I mean, blew up with this article because all these people were commenting, basically saying Me Too in the children's book industry, and they were naming names, and they were illustrators, authors,
the one place you
art directors,
you would think it wouldn't
editors.
be,
I mean, it wasn't just one. And there were a lot of stories of things happening at children's book conferences, because that's one of the only ways. Writing is very solitary. And one of the ways people who are wannabes try to get noticed is they go to these regional conferences, national conferences, with the hope of meeting an editor who will look at their material, or with the hope of meeting an art director or graphic designer who will look at their portfolio, or with the hope of meeting someone who's already successful. It's just like you hear about Hollywood stories about, people with scripts and passing them under restroom doors. Yep. People are like that within the smaller bubble of children's books. They want to meet someone who's successful. So it's that same kind of Harvey Weinstein thing where there are people who have celebrity in the children's book world who can take advantage because there's someone who just needs that nod, just needs that person who will say, so there's that. And then there are just people who were creepy. Some of the stories were, the people were just really creepy, and they kept coming back to the conferences. So that was one of the problems. So that blew up. And then so when March rolled around, an author who's very successful Grace Lynn, she came to Facebook basically saying, so now what are we women going to do? When, and she wrote this really impassioned introduction to creating a group for women of Kidlit to come together and kind of support each other and talk about all these issues and how can we make changes. And the idea was for every day in the month of March, because it's Women's History Month, someone within the Women in Kidlit group would create an essay, a blog entry, something that would create productive conversation, not just naming names, not pointing fingers, but these are issues I encounter, or these are issues I've researched, or these are things that I've been hearing. This is how, and provide suggestions for how we might create change. It wasn't just a place to let it all out and complain.
Right.
And it was fabulous. And they're all, so we had a private page for people to kind of post first. And what do you think? Is this ready to post? That kind of thing. And then there was a public page. And the public page has a hashtag that's #KidlitWomen. And they're all still out there. But we're talking about what's going to happen now because March is over.
And it's spelled Kid,
K-I-D, lit, L-I-T.
Kidlit Women. Mm-hmm. Okay, gotcha.
And there is talk actually of doing a podcast where some of the authors and illustrators and people involved in the original Kidlit would interview one of the other people about their essay.
Brilliant.
And talk about, how it happened, what they were thinking about and stuff. So that's still in the works. It hasn't happened yet, but I think that will happen. That would be really cool.
If anybody wants to call in on here and talk
well,
about this
they did ask
further,
for somebody to be a
know.
host for some. They're going to change hosts, and so if I become a host, I might maybe try and do it here. That would be fun.
You've got the studio.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
That would be fun.
Yep.
Thank you. So anyway, my essay was about the gender thing, but I wasn't the only one who did it, and everybody took on different takes on it. But the one that was, I think it was the first day, stuck with me the most. And I sent it to Mark because sometimes he's very protective of Sarah, and I think he gets the women not being in the books. I think he totally gets that because he changes pronouns along with me when we read them.
Yeah.
But I don't, I think not all men get what the women are saying until they experience it or see it themselves or whatever. And this essay just was so profound. It was an author whose books are middle grade, I think, and they use the word princess in the title, but they're hero adventure stories. And the character is a princess, so whatever. So she went to a school where not all the boys came, and the school didn't make them come to her presentation in the auditorium because the books were for girls.
Wow.
And she's been to other schools where the same thing happened. She went one place and she said something about asked the kids, why do you think boys aren't interested in this book? And a kid said with great vehemence, well, because it's about girls. And she thought, if this kid already has such anger about, girls, where is this headed? And then there are the kids who are taught that it's feminine to want to read the girl books, and there are boys who were interested who wouldn't come up and get her to sign their books because they were afraid to do it in front of
the other boys.
The boys.
Yeah. Yep.
And then so she now has it in her contract when she does school visits that she will not appear if they segregate the audience, because she's been other places where they said the boys stayed back in the classroom.
Now,
what is that telling kids? That they don't even need to listen to a woman, first of all, because she's there to talk about her expertise. She's an author. And that they don't need to care about half their classmates because they're girls. Yep. And they don't need to read things that would be very interesting to them. Red flag, princess.
Well, here's the thing that boggles my mind about that. This was in public schools currently in the United States, right?
Yep.
Okay, so if I was going to pick some place where I would figure you would find the most progressive ideals, it would start with educators. Mm-hmm. And so you're saying that even there, it's got roots that, and I don't know, they're not doing it to be malicious or anything like that at all. No, that's the thing.
They truly think it's beneficial to keep the boys back because they'll be disruptive because it's not
snickering
interesting
and be
or whatever. And meanwhile, she knows plenty of boys who read the books. I mean, she has fans who write to her and stuff. But and the thing that was upsetting was that it was more than one instance. And then when she started talking to other authors, she had multiple stories that were equally awful, if not. I think it might not have been her who had the thing where the boys were just kept in the classroom, and that was when someone reported back to her. But that one just really stuck with me because it was so
starkly
glaringly obvious
yeah.
what the message was, even though the administration did not see it in
So
all these different cases.
you should go through these essays and pick some out for selection of publication and publish a book with these
Yeah,
essays.
I don't know what they're doing with them.
Somebody should.
They have one person who did aggregate them in one place while we were posting, and I don't know what the plan is. Grace Lynn's kind of the one who put the whole thing together, and so I'm not sure what she plans
But it'd be
to
nice
do.
to have like a book that captured that moment with the
Right.
best essays, this moment
Yeah.
in time where this is happening and people are trying to figure out, well, how do we handle it? What do we want to do about it? And also, do you do you guys think that this comes from? Is this the fallout from Puritan values, the idea that men have certain roles and stuff in the family, that religious Puritan value that was so strong? Is that the fallout of this, or is it just that it's insidious and people aren't paying attention to it, and that we've went so long with this that they're not, that they haven't addressed it, and that now they are addressing it, or is there resistance that you find against this? Like people are saying to you in the majority, like, no, that's crazy. These are our American values. We can't change them.
I don't think it's that. I don't know. The one thing I did read also research about gender roles. There's more research about that in children's books than there is just assignment of gender in the
Right.
books. So the one thing I did read, I didn't read most of those because I was really trying to focus on the gender assignment, but they talk about the backlash of the different decades. And so in the 60s and 70s with sexual revolution and the bra burning and all of this, there's backlash after. So it's not a full decade echo chamber, but it's almost. So after you look at the 60s and 70s and there are more girl books, and then everybody's like, oh, we forgot about the boys. There aren't enough things for the boys because we focus too much on the girls. And then these boys don't like to read. We need to support the boys. So then there became this whole, and that's where we're still kind of stuck, because there's this mythology that boys don't like to read about anything other than boys, but girls will read anything. That ask any teacher, any librarian, any children's book author, and that's what booksellers, that's what everyone knows.
Right.
So there have to be more boys represented in books because boys need support more in their reading, which actually does turn out to be true in some senses, and they won't read about girls. But the problem with that is that you perpetuate this whole thing that boys shouldn't bother with anything girl.
It's an interesting observation. You tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that every time that they, especially in movies and stuff today, in the action adventure movies and all this kind of stuff, whenever they equalize the female character, it's always in the case of her being some sort of assassin or super, badass kind of thing. They never equalize them hardly, though, unless the woman is given some sort of superpowers or some sort of special thing to make that.
If
you
the person
understand
is
what I'm
just
saying?
normal, like the normal guy, they're a romantic interest. They're not just normal.
Right.
Like they're never just. The only times there's some movie. Oh, the movie, because it piqued my interest because it's a library movie. That one about the homeless people who kind of take over a library. I forget what it's called. It was recent, and it has is it Emilio Estevez maybe, and so it has librarians working in a library in a large city, I think in California, and there's a homeless population, and they need a place to be safe, and so they kind of basically take over the library. And the librarian is male. And all of the people shown in the preview are men. And then they give you one quick glimpse of some like hot and heavy smooch to let you know, don't worry, there's someone sexy in this movie. And everything else you see is male. And in libraries, guess what the predominant gender is in library?
It's
roles?
exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of male librarians in administration in public libraries, and there are male librarians, but they show, I think in the background there's one female librarian, but she wasn't portrayed in the preview in any way showing that she had an important role. Everything was male. So it's true. Like they always show a glimpse of someone female,
Yeah.
and but it's usually to show you that don't worry, it's not going to be all this. You're going to see some skin too. You know, that's really what it is.
We were talking in Professor Newman's class, film class, about how, like from the 60s, like with the Star Trek TV episode, when they would film the women, they would always put a diffuser gel on the lens to make them a little more fluffy, out of focus looking, you dreamy or something of that nature, I guess.
Yep.
I don't know, but it's weird when you notice it, especially when Kirk is talking to somebody, because it goes hazy, very sharp and chiseled. Hazy, very sharp and chiseled. It's like, wow.
Yes.
That's a lot of emphasizing there.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe I'm the only one that notices those weird editable. I make up new words.
Okay,
he
you
does.
should do a book.
Yeah.
New words.
I like
from
that word,
Eric Smith.
editable.
Yes,
I
Sarah
got-
and I are writing a book right now.
I'm sorry. I got what I was going to ask was, though, that in these situations where, geez, I lost my train of thought because of the edit that word you couldn't say over there. I'm still thinking
Way to go,
about
Eric.
that. No, I think that, and this is where I was going with this.
Broken
So
language.
here's the question, right? So the reason why material is published the way it is not. I think a lot of our artists, and we found this out kind of on the podcast, early on, artists think that, I'm going to create something and people are going to get it. What we're starting to kind of find out is that is not how art and entertainment, from the business standpoint, in any way, shape, or form works. Now, yes, there are always those things that'll happen where someone will come up with something and it'll be like some kind of game changer, artistically especially. But we see this in technology and things like that. But by and large, the business that's done day to day, 90% of the real grind of the business is calculated, projected, planned.
Like Ron Curtis and Susan Cody, and them describing all the ways that they had worked their profession into their life.
Yeah,
like the artists who have integrated that sort of. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
like
they've accepted that there's definitely a contract side to that, where somebody wants something and you have to give that to them. So as artists, they've kind of already taken that on, and that's what I'm getting at. So this market that exists for this the consumption of this type of material as it exists today is there because people are buying it.
Yeah, well, if you're a librarian or a bookseller and a parent comes to you, they say, I'm looking for a book for my son. What would you recommend? And a lot of people say, well, okay, if they don't say it out loud, they're thinking, well, boy, let's see, there's trucks, there's dinosaurs, there's this, there's that. Oh, well, we don't want to show them that one because that one's got a princess. And, there's that mental thought process.
Yeah, guilty.
Or it's,
Yeah,
or
I'd
it's
have
verbal.
to say me too.
Absolutely
I mean,
guilty. I've
yeah.
done it.
Say it. Yeah.
And I will say the thing I'm most guilty of having done is friends with older children, when they ask me for book recommendations, I apologize for it having a girl, which is so wrong. And I've stopped because it shocked me when I realized I was doing it. But I'll say, well, this one's really good. It's an adventure book, but it's got a girl, but it's okay. And so many booksellers and librarians say that, and I can't believe I've said it, but I have more than once. And all you have to do is remove the gender factor altogether and say this one's about an adventure where there's a quest for something, and you describe the excitement of the storyline. Who cares who it is? And you just say it that way, and that's what was encouraged actually in this Kidlit Women. Somebody pointed that out and said, this is how you do it. You just say, this is someone who's on a quest for, a treasure, and they encounter all these roadblocks to getting the treasure, and, the excitement is in how they finally, accomplish their quest. And that is exciting whether it's a girl or a boy, and the person reading it will accept that, but you have to take out the gatekeepers language, because adults are gatekeepers in so many ways for how kids get the books.
Pre-collars the interpretation for sure.
So
Absolutely.
Plato said, if you want to get to know somebody, game with them. And I'm a big gamer, right? And I'm into
First I'm hearing
RPGs.
this.
Yeah, and people make up characters in these games, right, to portray. Now, I've done this since I was 13, and I'm 48 now. I've gamed with a lot of different people. I've gamed with women and men, and I've seen a lot of, well, I've seen very few guys roll up a female character. Maybe 3 people in 33, 34 years or whatever it's been have I seen that will actively do that. One of them I'm gaming with. I've been gaming with on Sundays.
You get that he's talking about this esoteric pen and paper. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
esoteric. It's not Xbox. I mean.
Right. No, I get it. Yes.
So I mean, it's interesting because like it always throws me when we're talking in the game, in gaming. I have to remember that this guy is playing a female character.
Right.
And it's not normal because most people don't. I've never seen a female roll up a male character. They always roll up female characters. But to be fair, I've gamed with many, many, many more men than women.
I see a lot of guys on video games doing it, though.
But I'm never sure about the video game thing because there's so much in fantasy where the artist employs women in this type of armor that never existed and just emphasizes their sexuality.
I've seen a meme.
I'm not sure what their full motive is for doing it on video games, but when in an RPG, you at least know that they're trying to get into the female aspect. You know what I mean? Like they're trying to role play.
I didn't say they were doing it. They were doing it because they get that the game designers, no matter what, always the female characters are always highly sexualized, and the male characters are like these, super muscular or whatever.
Well, like you were
saying,
the
guys do it because they would just rather look at the girl than some dude running around on the screen. It's not. It's there's no.
See, that to me, that's not as pure as saying, "Look, I'm going to roll up this character for an hour and a half, and take that much time, and get a background, and then I'm going to portray this person as if I was." You know what I mean? Like, I don't see that very often, but I always applaud the people that do it, right? Because they're really stretching the idea of what a role-playing game is. It's like a mind experiment to try out things that you wouldn't normally do, or that culture tells you that you shouldn't normally do, right? You shouldn't do these things. But down in a basement with just your other buddies, I'll play a female, and it's good, man, because you need to figure that out because...
So here's my question: have you ever role played a girl then?
Yeah, absolutely. As a moderator of the games, though, I have to play every other character in the world, from deities to the common bartender, to present that story to the players that they interact in. So in that sense, I've played a lot of female characters, and
don't let him fool you either. He's got dresses in the closet.
Yeah, sure.
He's very progressive. He's a very progressive guy. Yeah, he's good.
We get some people that occasionally show up in dresses. I forget that guy's name, but I talk to him all the time. But it's always been a weird thing in the sense that when I do portray females, especially the average quote-unquote wench in the bar, the tavern or whatever, because that's the stereotype that goes with that whole stereotype, right? That whole fantasy stereotype. Like I've always tried to bring an element of realism in what's going on. In other words, they're not there just to be people to talk to and say bad things to and stuff like that, but they might steal your money. They might be there to actually do something that's effective in the storyline of the game that has some kind of meaning, just like a real person would be in a
They're
story.
not just window dressing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So like if you were writing a novel, which is a linear sort of a journey that you can't affect by the role play aspect, you'd want to do that same thing, right? You don't want to have those characters to just be taking up pages. You want them to have some sort of a function, preferably a realistic function in your story, because if their background at all, the background is there to uphold the story. So it's got to be realistic as possible, especially if the story's taken out of realism in any sense.
But that's not how mass consumed media is done.
Or how a lot of modules were written.
It's exactly the opposite of that.
Yeah.
It's
like to bring it back to me, because this is all about me today. All about Judy show. So no, but the illustrator of my books purposely made the character gender neutral from her perspective. Like my books are an animal that we call a bear, but other people are interpreting as other critters apparently. But it's a bear. For those listening, if you look at my book, it's a bear.
That's what I've always seen.
Thank you. So anyway, there's a bear dad and a bear child. Well, the bear child has no gender assigned in the book. There's no language that refers to the child. It's daddy's like this, daddy's like this. But their illustrations are always of a daddy and a child playing or doing whatever. So the first copy of the first version of the flap copy I got, so that's the stuff that's on the inside of the flap when you go to pick up a book at the store and try to decide whether you're going to buy it. You know, you read the little description. Well, the editor at the publishing house usually writes it, or the author writes it and submits it. But in this case, the editor wrote it and sent it to me. And mostly female editors in publishing. Truly, the percentages are so crazy, wacky. It's like, 80% female practically. So she sends me this flap copy that says, a bear cub and his dad. There's no gender in the book. The kid is not wearing, any of the stereotypical indicators, not wearing blue, any of the stuff, but it's not wearing a dress, doesn't have a bow, doesn't have big long eyelashes.
No pink.
There's no pink. She's wearing, I say she because I have a daughter and that's what inspired it. But the bear has yellow on through almost the whole thing. And there are funny little things where if you really wanted it to be a girl and you follow those stereotypes, you could jump on them. Like the shoes are kind of a pinky purple color, but it's little things, but people who really need it. And so it's there. But so Steph will say she's told me more than once that she purposely chose these things to make the character gender neutral. And yet the editor's first go-to thing again was he. Mm-hmm. So I wrote back and I said, I created this book because of my daughter, and, I was kind of hoping that it could at least be a girl. If it's not a girl, could we at least make it, mysterious and not name the gender? So she was really, she was receptive to it. It wasn't like it had to be a boy, but she changed it so that it was the dad and his cub. So the his obviously applied because the whole book's about dads. So that worked. But it was interesting to me that was the first knee-jerk text was that the baby was a boy.
You had talked about the publishing from the aspect of having a, I want to say a manager, but
agent.
Thank
Yeah.
you. The word was escaping me.
Make up a new one.
Huh?
You could have made up a new one.
I could have. I almost probably did until I stopped myself and said, wait, what's the
agent?
word?
A magent.
A
magent. Yeah, that
Teresa
sounds
would
awesome.
love that. Teresa could be a
Magent.
magent. I'll tell her.
That's going to go in the game tomorrow. Anyway. I see you guys get me all
Sorry, you're
off
asking
my
me
track,
about
right?
publishing and agents.
Yes.
Yeah.
Most of the people we've talked to are self-published, right? And they have talked about the virtues of that and some of the drawbacks, right? And we were talking earlier, and you were telling me a lot of the reasons why you had chose that path and the benefits to it. And, of course, I'd never heard those benefits before, and I was like, I want Matt to hear that too, but could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my background is traditional publishing, so that's where I just assumed I would go. And because Teresa became my agent before I ever published anything, so I had someone looking out for me. The realities of traditional publishing are very harsh, and it's very, I don't know the word to use. It can be soul-crushing to wait and wait and wait, get rejected, to wait. And it's different with email and electronic submissions now, but when I was at Viking, I was out for a full month because I was sick. And when I came back, I was the only one who received the mail that was the generic Dear Editor mail. Oh. It's called Slush.
Okay.
And we learned that back then in the day of paper submissions, that in 1 month's time, we stacked all the envelopes up on the floor. I am 5 feet 6 inches tall, and the stack was as tall as I am in 1 month. And those manuscripts are only, 3-4 pages long because they're for picture books and things. So there were thousands of submissions in a month. So in those days, some editors took 6 months to respond to somebody. And the olden rules were you were only allowed to submit to one place at a time. It was considered bad business to submit to more than one place, because if you read it and decided you were interested, but it had already gone to someone else and they were one day ahead of you and they read it and they were interested, then you'd lose out and you would have wasted that time reading it and considering it and all that because it was already out. So it was really considered bad etiquette to do it. So you wait and wait for 6 months, and you can't do anything else with it because you're waiting for a response. It was awful. But so the woman who was my mentor had a policy where she responded in 3 months, and she was like, a miracle worker because no one else did. So when I became my own editor, I did 3 months also after I learned from Deborah. That doesn't exist anymore, but it's still a long process. You find an editor if you do it through like a conference and you get an editor's name and you send to Dear Eric, I met you at the conference. You said you were willing to look at my material, and send it that way. You can't send generically anymore to almost any publishing house. They don't. It's called unsolicited manuscripts, and they don't accept them. It's so time consuming to respond to all of them. And so you have to find an agent nowadays to send to anybody because an agent gets around the unsolicited. So an agent automatically becomes solicited because an editor will have a relationship with an agent and know what type of thing they're going to send and all that. So it's still the same sort of soul-crushing work to find an agent, though, because you have to send to the agent and have that agent read just like an editor would and say, yes, I think your material is worthwhile, that yes, I will represent you.
And presumably they're as inundated as the company had been prior to them.
I don't hear Eric anymore.
Oh, the sound might have cut out on the, I can hear you guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. So you go through all this to find an agent. Then the agent does all that sending out, but there's still a delay in the agent getting a response from the editor. It might not be 6 months anymore, but there's still that delay. So you could send material to your agent. Your agent could say, yes, I think it's worthwhile. The agent will then send it to an editor. The editor will say, oh, hey, Eric, I recognize your name. Sure, I'll read what you send to me. The editor will read it. Weeks will pass, and I'm not exaggerating. And like my agent has a whole like spreadsheet of how she keeps track of when she sent to who and how long it's been, and she checks in every 2 weeks and says, hey, just checking in on manuscript A, because she has 40 clients, but I think 5 of them are authors. Is that we counted yesterday? I think.
Oh yeah.
I think she has 5 authors. So let's say I have 5 manuscripts with her. I don't know how many I have, but and each author might have around there. So she's got 25 manuscripts she's trying to track, and she doesn't send to all 25 to the same editors because everybody has different needs and tastes. So she sends them to different places. Then she has to follow up with each of them, and those people can take weeks, if not months, before they respond. So self-publishing, ta-da!
Right, circumvents
You
all
write
that.
it, and then you publish it, and there is no delay whatsoever. But the downside is you have to pay for almost everything, first of all. And in traditional publishing, you don't pay at all. There is no output on my side. I pay a percentage to my agent. It's just like real estate, or things like that. There is a contract where she gets a percentage of anything that gets sold. But there's no outlay of money where I have to do it before the book gets published.
And you were talking about the artists too, and the type of arts that appear in published books versus self-published books, and the difficulty of paying artists, right?
Yeah. So typically, the illustrators who are in self-published books are not experienced artists, because if you self-publish as an artist, there's no royalty for you. So you get paid whatever the newbie author can afford, then you're done. If the book takes off, because there are plenty of self-published books who find a new life in traditional publishing because they go viral as self-published, and then a publisher approaches the author and says, hey, can we publish your book? So then there's royalty, maybe, because you renegotiate. But if it goes viral and stays in the self-publishing bubble, there's no money for that illustrator because they got paid the one time, and that's all that was.
It's per job.
And of course,
One and
we've
done.
seen and talked with a lot of the self-publishers use clip art,
Right.
What do they call that? Public domain.
Yeah, and stock photos
Yep.
and things like that. So for a picture book standpoint, you might discover a great illustrator who's never been published before, which is great, but for the author, but not so great for the illustrator, because the illustrator doesn't get any money. They get recognition if the book goes somewhere, but usually self-published picture books in particular don't get picked up by libraries very often, things like that. They're harder to sell. You have to pay to every time you print them. You know, it's you have to pay for any publicity you do. You have to pay for.
Yep.
So when you're published by a traditional publishing house, there is a marketing office. There's a PR team. There's, you know, all that work is done. I don't pay for them to do that, you know. So there's a lot of benefit. The downside for the self-published person's perspective to the trade publishing is that there's less creative control.
Yeah.
And I think some of it comes from the myth that there's a danger that someone will steal your idea if you've written something. I can't tell you how many times I would get a manuscript when I was at Viking, and it would come with like a statement at the bottom, like, I've applied for copyright. You know, like, this is mine. And at conferences, even people would ask me, well, how do I know you're not going to take my manuscript and then just publish it?
Yeah.
Like, there's this, like...
Because you'll sue the crap out of us.
I know. Well, and
as soon as we do.
And
But
as soon as you put something down with your name on it, it's copyrighted. There is no, you don't actually have to apply it for copyright. It's just the way it is. But everyone was fearful of that. So if you self-publish, you know you're getting your story the way you want it, and you're putting it out there, and you get to control the art. And if you trade publish, you don't control the art at all.
Right. That makes sense.
So.
Yeah, we actually work with the X Factory Creative Network because it's like a collection of do-it-yourself, do-it-together kind of creative people, right? And that's what this guy Tangent that we work with does. He sort of does like the web hosting, and he provides sort of a place for people that are trying to do self-publishing so that they can get a little bit more leverage than just, you know, throwing it out on Facebook or whatever and trying to do it that way themselves. And with technology and stuff today, there's a lot of people that we've talked to on the show prior to, authors and things like that are really big into the self-publishing. But what's interesting about it, though, is there also seems to be kind of a concern that there's so much stuff now that it's really hard to kind of even find your way through the volume to get to the good
books
stuff.
and music
anymore.
both.
Yeah. I think it's true. It gives everyone so much more freedom, but it also just fills the world with so much more. But it's nice. I mean, for example, we have a class at OUL, children's literature, and the professor there thinks that she might have the students write a book in class sometime, because now you can self-publish, and there's some place you can go for like $10 and get one copy of the book or whatever. They can do it for the experience, and then they'll have the book, and it's not because they want to go out and be the next, you know, J.K. Rowling or whatever. They're going to do a book because it's a good exercise, and they can. So in some respects, there's lots of good things about it. It just makes it, it's really hard to get noticed if you self-publish or trade publish. I mean, my book, I keep looking for it places just for fun, you know, and half the time it's, you know, there'll be one copy somewhere in the midst of thousands of other copies, you know, because bookstores only buy sometimes one copy of everything, because if not, they can't fit it all on their shelves. So. And
I guess the same thing would be true with libraries, right? Like the libraries don't probably have self-published books of any type.
Not very often. We have one children's book self-published because it was published by one of our former students, Jerry Snyder. So we have his book.
Oh, yeah, he did a play with that too. I was in the
Jerry
play.
Bloom.
Jerry
Bloom. Yeah,
so, I think so.
Buddy Bloom.
Buddy
Sorry,
Bloom.
Buddy Bloom.
Yeah.
Jerry is his name. Buddy Bloom. So we have his book because
cool.
there's a connection to him, and you know, all that. But typically, we don't find out about them. I mean, they're not marketed through catalogs and things the way other books are. They're not reviewed the way other books are, and that's usually how libraries buy
They don't
things.
get any
based on
rewards
reviews.
generally, unless they, like you said, go viral and.
Right.
It's that weird catch-22 that, like, you have to have job experience.
Right.
Well, I've never had a job. Well,
Right.
I can't hire you until you have job experience. But I can't get job experience if you don't hire me, right? So it's sort of that same catch-22. Well, you know, it's already got to be trending. Well, it can't trend if nobody knows it exists, right?
We have talked to a couple of people that did publishing in the traditional way, and then later switched over to self-publishing,
Yeah.
but they had already made a solid group of
Right.
people who were interested in their work
Yes.
that they could port over to self-publishing and then branch out
And there's a huge fan base for some self-published authors. Once they find their group, then they've got it made because those people talk about their books and they post about, bloggers and Goodreads and, social media of any sort. Then there's a whole world of connections to be made. But when you're it's the first one you're doing and you don't know much about it, it's hard. I wouldn't want to do it just because of how much work is involved, let alone, worrying about who I'd find to do all these different things. But it's more work than any part of trade publishing, I think.
May I see what you brought with you?
Yes, I brought one of each of my books. I have 2 books right now. What Daddy's Like is the first one that I did, because of Mark.
And that's down at the bistro too, right?
Yeah, and now I think she'll get the Mommy's Like. The bistro is the cafeteria at OUL. They are also our kind of sort of bookstory kind of thing. What Mommy's Like came out just April 10th. Of this year. So the Daddy's book came out last April.
And you got one in the works.
I have one that comes out in 2019. That's a board book called All Kids Are Good Kids. And then I have one coming in 2020 that we haven't given a title to yet.
2020?
Yeah. It's publishing works. That's another thing that I don't think everybody gets. Like,
Mommy's Like the library too.
Isn't it crazy?
Yeah,
the Mommy's book has a library in it. I don't know how that happened.
What is that?
It just happened. They go to the library in the Mommy's book. Part of it is, you think about it from like sometimes you have to be bizarrely rational in children's books and you think it's all fantasy and you have to really think about it. So daddies all like the same thing Mommy's like. Like they like hugs, they like kisses, they like playing, all this stuff. So I already did a daddy's book. So what does Mommy's book become? It becomes a copy of the daddy's book. Well, then I can't do that. So the Mommy's book had to be something different. So they take a field trip because they had to leave home because daddies like they're at home.
I can't believe we've gotten this far into this podcast, especially talking to an author who's currently publishing works that's sort of what would you call this, Eric? We have to rewrite our mythos or our myths, and someone he always gets on this kick, especially with authors. I'll give it to you, man, if you just hang on a second.
That was good. But I got it now.
So how one of the things that Eric talks about a lot was it's not Graham Hancock.
No. Joseph Campbell.
Joseph Campbell had this statement about it's up to the artists and stuff to kind of reinterpret or recreate our myths. Mm-hmm. To kind of more coincide and be representative of the people of the era, right? Mm-hmm. And I got to wonder about a lot of the things that you talked about, especially with the Me Too stuff and the way that characters are represented in books and things like that. That's kind of what you're doing here. This is kind of how it has to start because it's so culturally ingrained, and and not only is it ingrained in our us as individuals, but it's also in our art. It's in everything. It's that way, and I love this idea of things that are sort of, I won't say hidden in plain sight, but they're like as soon as you start pulling on this thread, all of these other things start unraveling too. And I'm finding that. That this movement is doing that. Yeah. It's going everywhere. Yeah. It was funny because when it first started happening, everybody was talking about it. And then when it spread like a spider web into everything, then everybody started getting really paranoid about it, like shutting up because they're going, holy cow, that's happening in either it happened to me or it's happening in my sphere and I never would have guessed it would have been here kind of thing, But I see that, like, I seen something once about how, like, countries are represented on maps, and they're not represented by their actual physical size. And you grow up your whole life going, well, that's a map, but you don't think about that that way. And I find this to be fascinating that way too. That there's this thread that, but I think you're part of that now, and the people that are having these discussions now are starting to rewrite this now.
Yeah, rewrite the culture and the. I don't know, I can't think of a better word, but like kind of resetting the stereotype. Yeah. Right? To be a bit more accepting of larger situations.
Realistic. A bit more realistic. Okay? Let's start there.
But as an artist, still allowing the connection to the metaphysical, the idea of what's in your head and bringing that into the real life. And that, I couldn't agree with you more, Matt.
I will say my
set
thing
you up, buddy.
That I'm most excited about when you said that about me being part of the pulling the thread is that when we first in the Kidlit Women private side of the page were posting what subject we were going to claim for our essays, I posted about what I said about how we default to male and all this, and 2 different authors wrote, "Oh my God, I started a manuscript and my character is male. What the heck?
What am I doing?
And
Why is this
they
happening?"
both changed them to girls. And the one author said, "It's a hero story. Girls can be heroes. Why did I do that?" She said, "And it's so much better because I changed it." And I did that. And I felt pretty cool about that. That's the best thing that happened, I think.
Yeah,
It shows you made an impact in a way.
Yeah, well, and we were all there because we were concerned, and even that group was doing what we were concerned about, and so it was
well,
good
making
that,
people stop and think is better than even believing that you've changed someone's mind.
right.
It's so much better to know that you just made them think about something they're doing.
Right. So like you guys, you have a son. He reads all the time. You read to him.
Yep.
So think about, when you're picking a book to read to him, are you going to pick a book because it has a boy in it? Or are you going to pick a book because you heard it's really good?
Yes.
That kind of thing. Forget, who's reading it. Are there girls reading this, boys reading it? Who cares? Is this a good book? Is it getting good reviews? That kind of thing. And then say, hey, why don't we break out of the box, read something we haven't read before? Don't say, let's read a girl book, but let's read something we haven't read before.
Yeah.
That conversation alone, then he reads a book that he might never have encountered and then likes it. Oh my God, then maybe he'll read that author again. So there are ways to just have
and
make
early
changes.
on have a bigger world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's the same for ethnicity and race and all that. There's a lot of movements right now to read outside your box as far as what you're used to, as far as the culture you participate in every day. So read books about people who don't look like you, who live in places you've never visited, all of that. It's the same thing, looking at it from a gender point of view, but you could also do the same thing with any place you've never lived, all of that.
Yeah, it's a weird sort of, humans are funny. The human condition is funny. How we like to get into tribes. We like to get in, like, that's my football team.
Yeah.
That's my, whatever. And it's not always realistic, and that's kind of what you're like, male, female, or race or whatever, grouping up this way. I don't understand it, but we do have this weird, it's probably caveman instincts or something like that from way back, where it's like, hey, those are humans, they look like me, I'm going to get in their group so that I don't get eaten by the tiger or something, and it just sort of, those people survived, and all the people that are out wandering around going, I don't know, I kind of like the wilderness and being like, rah, and they get eaten by a tiger, so that gene dies out,
Now we get the prudence gene.
Millions of years, boom, paranoid human condition, or whatever it is. But is there anything else that because I think Eric said we had you for about an hour, so we've gone past that. I apologize. So is there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
No, well, I guess I'm not going to get into it, but what I just ended with, talking about race and culture and things, it's not one or the other. It's, it's an intersectional of all of these things. So when you are noticing, hey, there's a girl character, hey, there's a boy character, you also need to be thinking about who's represented in the humans, obviously with the animals and the inanimate things, it doesn't matter. But how many of the books you're looking at are written by people who don't look like you, who don't live near you, who don't have the same experiences you have? And when you start noticing that, your blood pressure will go off the chart.
Yeah.
So I just, encourage you, in children's literature, it's a huge problem of lack of representation for anyone who is not white. And it's everyone's growing awareness of it is not helping the situation.
Yes.
And so there have not yet been a ton. There are new books that show people in different cultures and races and things, but it's still a problem. So I would encourage that on top of gender, that you also look at those things. It's a whole different discussion to talk about the numbers for that too, but it's not an exaggeration to say if you can't be what you don't see. And so little kids who don't see themselves, I mean, my daughter has already said things like, we watched a WNBA game on just a glimpse of it on TV, and she said, I didn't know girls could play basketball. Yeah. Because she never, and that wasn't because she's been sheltered. It was just within the time we've had her in our lives, we just haven't sat down and watched basketball, Yeah. But even in that little tiny thing, so think about every book someone's ever read to you, and if you've never seen anyone who doesn't look like you, both gender-wise or skin color, culture, whatever. So it's all of it layers to be so important.
Eric and I have talked about this on the show before. I remember that interview with Whoopi Goldberg, and how important it was for her when she watched Star Trek the first time to see the black woman on
position
TV.
Of command and power.
And as an officer.
And as a team member.
Yeah.
Well, and have you heard her talk? Did you hear her talk about how the reason she took the role she took was because she wanted people to know there were black people in the future?
Yeah.
I mean, that's so horrible to be. I mean, to say, if I don't take this job, there will be no representation of a black person in this other world, and that the people creating the other world didn't think of that. That just, ugh. So anyway, so that would be, I would be here all day. But, so that would be what I'd encourage, is just to, read out of your box.
Well, I tell you what, when anything else comes up and you guys, you want to use the podcast in the future, or if you got some other subjects you want to come talk about, we love doing this. We could do this for hours, but I really appreciate you being on the show. Thank you so much.
It was a lot of fun. Oh, and I have to do one shout out because I understand you have Australian listeners.
Yep.
And I was a Rotary International Exchange student in Australia for a year when I was a senior in high school. So hi, Australia. So I lived in Werribee outside of Melbourne.
Sweet.
Wow.
So shout out to the
Hi,
land
everybody.
down under.
Coming to you from the past.
Okay.
All right,
Thank
folks.
you.
Thanks for listening. We appreciate you taking the time. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons, and we'll catch you all next time.
Bye.